No, he's right. We're gonna
Okay.
excuse ourselves. So.
You are?
All right.
Okay. Hey, nice meeting you, Grace.
Nice to meet you. I'll see you. I'll swing by around 4:30ish.
All right.
Right here. I see what you're doing, so.
Sometimes I have to be behind it to.
I understand.
I've done so, I've lost count by now. I've had so many interviews.
Tilt it down even more.
But I've noticed that it was a passage of years.
Right there.
Maybe that's why I'm reading Malachi. Is that the amount of disappointment and this feeling disheartened at the violence and the insanity of it. It just, in many ways, it's you know, I came from originally a sort of drawn to the certitude of fundamentalism, to migration to very rationalist and reason-based orientations, and now I'm migrating sort of a middle of the road, where not everything can be resolved with reason.
No. Yeah.
There does seem to be. There's just situations where it is really hard to explain what human beings do without acknowledging some malevolent.
Sounds like maybe you're taking the similar to Al-Ghazali sort of.
Yeah. I mean, it you know, migration back from Ibn Rushd to Ghazali type.
Yeah.
It just it's from 9/11 till now, the amount of ugliness.
I mean, I kind of want to, but
Yeah, it gives you a very
it's,
jaundiced.
you know,
Might me too.
I'm
I've
very
seen.
close to.
It's fascinating though. It's like the moth that's drawn to the flame.
Leave it like that.
Religion and violence, how it seems to be such a twisted world.
I don't think that we need religion to. I mean, if you take out religion, it seems like we'll invent something like fascism or communism and do it anyway.
You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just 1 second here, we'll get home.
All right. I won't quote the Quran to you. There's no way, but I mean, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. And it'll appear on the screen. So it's,
You can just refer to the verse.
The verse.
Yeah, like most jurists, I've memorized the Quran.
Sure.
Is there somebody out there? There's just noise coming from the hallway out there. That you want to check. What is that? Are you hearing that? That click pop, click pop.
When the doors
When the
open,
door's
here.
closed? Yeah.
When the door's closed. I
There's
think
a
so.
little lounge and there's a kitchen, so somebody's making.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what they're doing.
Well,
but-
let's just get going.
Does the kitchen have a door?
Yeah,
So you
And
can
if
close.
Is it closed?
it's open right now, but I mean, anytime anyone were to go in there, they'd have, you know. That's,
I think we're all right. Why don't we just get going?
Okay. Ready, Professor?
Okay.
Okay.
Stand by just one moment, we're not rolling.
Dr. Abu al-Fadl, there is a passage known as the sword verse in the Quran, which is frequently cited by militant Muslims and which is often taken out of context and misunderstood by non-Muslims and Muslims alike. Now, based on your studies of the occasions of revelation, the Asbab al-Nuzul, and the classical jurists, as well as modern self-styled jihadis, can you explain the context of this revelation, its meaning at the time that it was revealed, how it was interpreted and used during the classical period, and finally, how you think Muslims and non-Muslims understand or misunderstand this passage today?
Yeah, this is what's known in Arabic as to say for the sword verse. And it, sword verse says roughly something to the effect that take them and slay them wherever you may find them and so on. Now, of course, the first preliminary issue is actually reading the full text, i.e. the verses leading up to it and the verses after it, and quite clearly it speaks about a specific context, and that is an issue arises among the Muslim community at the time of the Prophet Muhammad as to whether in Arabian practice there were certain months in the year known as Ashhur al-Hurum, or the sanctified months, where no bloodshed was allowed and no war was allowed. And Muslims were attacked during these sacred months or sanctified months. And many Muslims at the time were very reluctant to respond to the attack militarily, to engage in any type of military activity during these months, the Ashhur al-Hurum. And the verse, just any fair, plain reading, would show that the verse addressing this, it says that first it recognizes in principle, it validates the Arabian practices of month of where bloodshed is truce months, or months that where bloodshed is not is especially considered unethical or reprehensible, and were very common medieval concept, by the way. It comes in a lot of traditions. You've found a lot of traditions, so it recognizes it, but then it gives permission. It says that no, you can respond to a military attack, and it does so in and here the Arabic phrasing is very important by saying effectively that, well, now during these months, if you are attacked, you may respond anywhere, any place, and after your these months, you may respond anywhere, any place, and then it goes on to say that, but peace is better, and try to resolve conflicts and so on. There is a jurisprudential issue, a very old debate, perhaps as old as 1400 years, as to whether this verse, taken out of context, in other words, you just take this verse without any reference to either truce month or even the verses right after it that say that to peace is better, or talks about reconciliation and so on, whether this single verse abrogated 134 verses that in the Quran that talk about peace as the way of God, or that talk about war as a form of fasad in al-ard, meaning corruption on earth, that war is fundamentally an act that corrupts the earth, and peace as something which is a moral, normative principle that human beings are supposed to seek after, or supposed to work towards. And so the jurisprudential debates tended, in terms of especially abrogation debates, the Nasikh and Mansukh debates, would talk about if this verse abrogated all prior verses. The problem, though, and this is something that a lot of Muslims, unless they're seriously educated in the tradition, would not know, is that the minority position was that this verse abrogated the 134 verses. The majority position is that no, the verse it means what it says. It's talking about a particular context, a particular situation, and that the other verses, far from being abrogated by this verse, address a variety of contexts. The context in which someone is attacking your home, someone is destroying your places of worship, whether you can respond. God doesn't like transgressors, which is a part of the context, and so this verse is the majority position did not see this verse as giving license to sort of an open state of warfare, but the Islamic position on war must be taken through a scrutiny of the totality of evidence, the various commands, either in the Quran or the traditions of the prophets or the various arguments of the disciples of the Prophet and so on. The problem is you see among radical Muslims, or what I call puritanical Muslims, a tendency to relying mostly on secondary sources, is that they latch onto the position that this verse abrogated all other verses. There is also a problem, is that we don't know whether, as a matter of historical progression, whether this verse was revealed after or all other verses that address warfare. In fact, as many scholars said, that verses that talk about if they seek peace, then seek it as well, or verses that say that if God would have willed, God would have made a people fight you. So, and that's sort of a curse or hardship or a test from God. So do not turn away those who extend their hands in peace, but if people extend the hand of peace, extend your hand of peace to them. Many scholars said that, well, actually these verses were revealed after the sword verse. So you have a problem with the notion of if something abrogates, whether it comes first or later. And we can't really, we establishing sort of the progression of the Quran in this consecutive fashion is, to say the least, from a scholarly perspective, quite debatable. And so among Puritan Muslims, radical Muslims, there is a clear tendency to jump on this verse and to take it as not just abrogating every other discourse in the Quran about war, but to also even abrogate the conduct of the Prophet himself during war. To say effectively that, well, it's true that that there are all these prophetic traditions saying you do not attack a people without notice, that the leadership, only a certain hierarchical structure has the power to declare war or not to declare war, or verses that talk about rules of discrimination between civilians and non-civilians and so on. And to jump on this verse as if it is basically a blank card. It says, well, you can wage war in whatever way you want and in any context you want, and that, of course, then it defeats the whole notion of Islamic law, because there then is no law. If you just tell people do whatever you want, then we don't have law anymore. We have the negation of law. And interestingly, even someone that many radicals admire greatly, like Ibn Taymiyyah, very prominent classical scholar, rejected that position, the position that says the sword verse abrogated all, and even rejected the idea that Muslims engage in warfare with non-Muslims because of the disbelief of non-Muslims. In other words, Ibn Taymiyyah, like many other scholars, said that the only reason that Muslims may fight non-Muslims is to do so in self-defense, a notion of protecting yourself from the threat unharmed by others. And that's the only legitimate operative cause. But the fact that someone believes or does not believe is never a legitimate operative cause.
So,
Excuse me a second. I'm just going to hang a sign on the door out here while you ask me next question.
okay.
I'm sorry.
No problem, Wafa.
No, the nasakh wal mansukh is so important.
You know, in the book, The Place of Tolerance in Islam, I was talking about this. And there's a fellow called Jadullah, I think. He wrote a response to this book in which he said, well, you know, the sword verse has abrogated all the verses that Khabar al-Fadl cites. I mean, what I did is quite simply, in response to him, I included a very long footnote where I cited to all original sources that actually say it was never established, even by a majority of the scholars, that this verse abrogated all other verses. And if someone actually bothers to do some research into what they're pontificating on, you know, they would realize this. It's not that these sources are impossible to find.
No, they're not. No, that's true.
We're rolling, Chaplain. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Obviously, the work of the jurists is very important, how they've elaborated and responded to particular situations as they arose in light of the revelation of the Quran and also the prophetic traditions. So then, from whence does the division of the world into the spheres of Dar al-Harb, of Dar al-Islam, the abode of war and the abode of peace, arise? Theologically and juridically, how valid is it to apply this dichotomous understanding of the world in geopolitical terms to today's globalizing world?
One is quite fascinating because it's not, this division is not in the Quran. And in fact, what is in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَدْعُو لِدَارِ السَّلَامِ. God invites to the abode of peace. And so the expression abode of Islam is not in the Quran, but the abode of salam, the abode of peace, is in the Quran. And the abode of peace, of course, is a metaphysical concept. And but the notion of Dar al-Islam, the abode of Islam, and the abode of infidels, or the abode of war and so on, it arose directly as a unmitigated transplant of the law at the time, where the Persian Empire, for instance, divided the world into the abode of Persia and then the abode of everything else, and Roman law divided the world into the Roman, the Byzantine Empire at the time, and then everything else. And so this sort of bipolar division of the world 1,000 years ago was a common way of defining the us versus them. But soon after the adoption of this, which was literally it didn't arise out of Islamic text, it arose out of a simple reading of the geopolitical context of their time and place. But shortly afterwards, Muslim jurists, actually among their most brilliant innovations, is that they soon realized that this is too simplistic, and it didn't account for the various subtleties by which they saw the world. And so we quite within, shortly after the death of the Prophet, we find that there arises all types of concepts, such as the Dar al-Ahd or Dar al-Mawada, the abode of treaty, the abode of peace, the abode of
Dar al-Sulh.
Sulh, the abode of non-hostility, and this again is supported by practices both of the Prophet and the companions, in the sense that there are certain Christian tribes where Umar ibn Khattab, the second rightly guided caliph in the Sunni tradition, did not. Umar did not treat them either as part of the Muslim nation or as outside the Muslim nation, did not have them pay the jizya, did not have them pay the poll tax. They complained to Umar that they find paying the poll tax demeaning. They don't want to go to war against Muslims, but they don't want to pay the poll tax. And he made an arrangement with this tribe, which is in the today's Bahrain area. Basically, it was a Christian tribe. And then also the historical precedent of Nubia, which again did not pay jizya and was not part of a board of war or board of Islam. So Muslim jurists, even were pioneers in many ways, in that they rejected this bipolar division of the world. And just one further thing, because it's quite important, is that what a lot of non-specialists do not realize is that by the time you 3 or 4 centuries within the development of Islam or Islamic law, you find people actually talking in terms of the abode of true piety, the abode of justice, Dar al-Adl, or Dar al-Zulm, the abode of injustice,
Oppression.
or oppression. That's right. And these become far more critical. So you find jurists in the 12th century, 13th century saying that God would give victory to the abode of justice over the abode of oppression, regardless of whether the abode of justice was Muslim or non-Muslim. And again, this came as a response to historical realities, to the Mongol invasions and defeat of Muslim armies, to the Crusade invasions and defeat of Muslim armies, and why did God allow this to happen? And so so the point is that the abode of Islam versus the abode of war is a historical myth, and it's even an Orientalist myth.
Mhm.
And Muslim Puritans who just take it without any further study or scrutiny, in fact, are reproducing a classic. It's like when Muslims adopt Hollywood images of a Muslim cleric or so on, or a archetypal Muslim. They're actually adopting a very Orientalist projection, quite unresponsive to the complexity and richness of the Islamic tradition itself.
Mhm. Very good.
Chaplain, I need to pause tape just 15 seconds here.
Great, Chamber. That was great. I think it is an Orientalist trope that they play into, and then it's when all the worst things that you believed are confirmed. Just like when we use the Crusades.
Yeah.
And it's a better metaphor.
You know, the Hanafis, for instance, said that that an area could be ruled by Muslims and not be a part of the abode of Islam, Dar al-Islam.
Mhm.
And an area could be ruled by non-Muslims and be a part of Dar al-Islam. And what they thought made its operative legal cause is Izharuddin, where you can practice your religion freely.
Right.
So if you can do so in non-Muslim territory, then that's abode of Islam. And if you can do so you cannot do so in Muslim territory, then that's not abode of Islam. And so, you see here.
Yeah. Are we?
Camera's rolling.
Okay. That's a great point about the Huruddin, the freedom for religion. Therefore, you could make a case for, in today's globalized world, that the division of the world into Dar al-Harb or Dar al-Islam, the simplistic idea of that, is no longer legitimate.
It's not only no longer legitimate, but it's theologically very problematic. It's contrary to the universality of the Islamic message, to the humanism within the Islamic message. It clashes with the Quranic invitation that we have made you into people and tribe to know one another, لِتَعَارَفُوا, to actually engage and have intercourse with one another. And it becomes a political tool in that camouflages as theological doctrine, but it is really a thoroughly political concept.
Mm-hmm.
The theology point is that theologically you would challenge the concept. And the only way you can ignore the theology is if you commit yourself only to a dichotomous political position of the world.
Well, that's good. Yet, in terms of conflict, you know that we in the West have adopted and even secularized the just war theory, which was elaborated largely in the historical context by Christian thinkers, beginning with Augustine and then furthered by Thomas Aquinas. What guidance does the Islamic tradition provide in terms of deciding when it is legitimate to declare war, and then the rules that one should follow in the conduct of war?
One of the biggest crimes committed by Puritan Muslims, there's recently I wrote that what they do as Islamic tradition is an abomination, because one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest crimes, and what I consider an abomination, is that they take the full richness of the Islamic tradition and they hammer it down into this linear, superficial, unidimensional ideology. And just war is a point in case, because you could say that the just war Islamic tradition, started with the Prophet himself. The Prophet himself, who has clearly addressed the issues of discrimination in warfare and the issues of proportionality in warfare, where, for instance, some of his teachings prohibits the use of weapons of mass destruction in response to certain attacks. So even if you are attacked, you may not respond, for instance, in the teachings of the Prophet, you may not respond using fire or drowning or destroying natural resources just because you've been attacked. That's a concept of proportionality. And then discrimination, not just the protection of civilians, but the protection of non-combatants and those who could not be combatants. In other words, that's why the Prophet, for instance, said that hermits and priests and rabbis may not be hurt, because by nature, in his historical context, of course, these people did not engage in war. In their tribal context, these people would never, and the same would apply. And then shortly after the Prophet, we have certain disciples, successors of the Prophet, that play a very prominent role in the development of just war ideas in Islam, both Jusam Bello and Jusam Bellam, both in terms of just cause for war and rules of war, such as Ibn Mas'ud particularly, and